Today on Enzo Homestead, I'm going over some examples of prepper and survival myths. One of the myths I hear all the time is that, oh, I can use 1 gallon of water per person per day, or 10 gallons of water per person per day. And while that may be okay in a backpacking or camping trip or a 3-day excursion, it's not really practical. Most people in a residential environment are using anywhere between 150 and 200 gallons per day. In the RV, we're using about 50 gallons per day. This is a 2,500 gallon water tank. And with our current usage, we would probably go through this every 1 to 2 months. So really the amount of water you store is tremendously greater than most people think. Everybody always talks about how to build a slow sand biofilter for water, or they get these expensive backpacking pumps or dromedary bags that will, filter water, or maybe they'll do some kind of still or using a Berkey. That's all fine and dandy in the field, but nobody ever talks about, hey, do you know how to service and maintain a well? Do you know about the guts and the things that go into a well, or how to power it? Do you know how to test your water? They have these online on Amazon. You can get these 16-in-1 tests, and they test heavy metals, chemicals, all kinds of different things. And learning how to take a water sample and test your water is a very, very useful skill to have. Not just, oh, I'm going to build some kind of filter out in the field. Another myth that I hear all the time is, I'm going to build myself a bug out bag and I'm going to go out into the woods and live off of everything in my bug out bag. Well, I put together a very thoughtful, mindful bug out bag over the years. It's got everything that I should need in it, and it's very meticulously thought out and planned. I'll say that since I left my house and literally moved out into the woods on the side of a mountain, I haven't used it once. So think about what you really, really need. It may not just be a bug out bag. There are other things that you're going to need. So don't think I'm going to put everything in a backpack and that's what I'm going to use to survive. Because in reality, it's great to have some things with you if you're going overnight or going to a hotel or doing something. But in the long term, you're not going to live out of a backpack. Again, I haven't even used it once. Some of the things that I use on a regular basis are things like a good chainsaw. I use this all the time to clear fallen trees that are blocking a road, or chopping up firewood, or just maintaining the property here. Not only maintaining the property, but maintaining the chainsaw, making sure it's oiled, the chain's sharp, taking care of it. The chainsaw is probably my #1 tool. The other thing I use a lot of are shovels, filling in potholes, digging pits, making all kinds of things. Shoveling gravel, putting in spots in the road. Shovels are very, very practical. The other thing I use a lot of is plywood, raw materials, other types of hand tools and power tools. I use stuff in the garden, boxes of screws, boxes of nails. There's all kinds of stuff. Vacuums. Weed whacker, that's another one. I use a weed whacker a lot. I also find myself using a ladder regularly. I don't own a tractor, but I get a fair amount of use out of just using a hand cart. Another myth that I hear all the time is that, oh, I'm gonna get one of these survival canisters of seeds and I'm gonna plant a garden and be able to live off my garden. Well, unless you know how to garden and you had experience gardening, a canister of seeds is not going to do you any good. We are planning on putting in, first of all, we oriented the house and the barn so it's 12 degrees east of solar south. And the reason we're not doing due solar south is because it's better to get a little bit of that early morning sun and taper it off in the afternoon so it doesn't get so hot. So although you'll hear online everybody says, oh, south facing is the best, I actually say 12 degrees off solar south, and that's because it gets a little bit more that morning. With that being said, I put a lot of thought into gardening. We're planning to put in at least 10 raised beds in a greenhouse and maybe another 10 raised beds outside. Normally you only get about a half a pound of produce out of every square foot. And so if you have, you know, 10 raised beds, that may give you 300 pounds in a season. But you know, to do that, you have to have water, so you have to put in irrigation main lines. You have to be able to time it or hand water it and take a lot of care of it. You have to know when to plant which seeds. Some may be cool season, some of them need more sun. You need to know how to propagate seeds, you know, save seeds. And there's a lot that goes into gardening. So when I hear, oh, I'm just gonna buy this canister and I'll be good, that is not practical. Another myth I hear all the time is, oh, I'm gonna go out into the woods with my trusty rifle and I'm just gonna hunt and live off the deer and the elk and the bears and all the game in the woods. Unless you're an avid hunter and you know how to hunt, you're not gonna be finding deer, you're not gonna be harvesting game. You need to know what months do the deer come out? What months can I even hunt? And once you have a deer, okay, how do I preserve it? Can I salt it? Can I, you know, freeze it? What am I going to do with the meat? Because taking an animal, especially large game, if you're responsible, you try to use it. And in a survival situation, most people not only wouldn't be able to get a deer, but they probably, once they did have one, wouldn't know how to store it or preserve it. So I think that having a firearm is always a good idea, but trying to say I'm just going to live off the land without having any hunting experience, not going to happen. One of the most overlooked myths is I'm just going to go be able to survive without any cooking skills. Food is probably foremost the #1 thing that you need to focus on in a survival scenario. If you don't know how to cook, prepare food, and feed yourself, I mean, that's something you're going to be doing on a daily basis. And that is one of the most important skills to have. If you don't know how to use a cast iron pan, or, you know, barbecue or any of that type of stuff, how are you going to cook meat on an open fire? And how are you going to feed yourself? So cooking is a huge skill. And I think that in the survival prepper community, it's not even on most people's radar. Earlier today, I put together a battery bank underneath the RV. This is to help through the winter when we have, you know, overnight we need to run the heater and a lot of lights and things without zapping the batteries. So we've got 6 Trojan 6-volt batteries. They're wired in both series and parallel so that it's 12 volts and it's about 765 ampere hours. But with deep cycle batteries, you only want to run them to 50%. So really it's kind of in that 330 range of ampere hours. But learning how to wire a battery bank and learning about electronics is another thing that I highly recommend in a survival situation. We also recently started insulating the undercarriage of the RV because winter's coming, so we use 2-inch rigid foam board to insulate the bottom, and it makes almost like an underquilt on a hammock, a layer of warmer air so that it doesn't get so cold in the RV at night.